Tesla taught us that energy obeys silent patterns. It's a hidden harmony, not the chaos. These patterns are the universe's true code.
You were taught to imagine energy as something that does things. It pushes, it pulls, it strikes, it moves. From the first time you watched something fall, burn, explode, or shatter, the lesson was quietly installed. Energy is action. Energy is impact. Energy is force. That story feels obvious because your senses evolved to detect motion, heat, pressure, and sound. You notice what changes, you notice what moves, you notice what breaks, so your mind builds a simple model. Energy is what causes visible change. But this model hides a deeper mistake, because almost none of the energy shaping your world is dramatic. Almost none of it is loud. Almost none of it is violent. Most of it never touches your senses at all. When an object falls, you think gravity pulls it, but nothing reaches out, nothing grabs. There is no invisible hand tugging downward. The object simply follows a shape carved into space itself. When electricity flows, you imagine electrons racing through wires like water, through pipes. But electrons barely move. What travels is not matter, but pattern, a reorganization rippling through a field. When light travels, you picture particles shooting across space. But nothing actually journeys from source to destination in the way your intuition demands. What moves is alignment, phase, structure. Your brain insists on turning everything into collisions, pushes, and impacts, because that is the only language your senses understand. But nature does not speak that language. At the deepest levels, energy does not behave like a force. It behaves like a rule, not a command, not a shove, a constraint, a silent restriction that limits how reality is allowed to arrange itself. Imagine a marble rolling across a surface. You think the surface causes the marble's motion, but the surface doesn't push. It merely restricts where the marble is allowed to go. The shape determines the path. The geometry decides the outcome. Now extend that idea to everything. Space itself has shape. Time has structure. Fields have geometry. And energy flows only where those structures permit. Nothing is being forced. Everything is being guided. This is where the old intuition breaks. Because if energy were truly a force, then motion would be fundamental. Change would be primary. Action would be the base layer of reality. But experiments suggest the opposite. Structure comes first. Motion comes second. Energy doesn't create patterns. It follows them. And once you start to see energy this way, the world stops looking like a battlefield of forces and starts resembling a silent architectural design. Every particle, every wave, every interaction, all tracing invisible corridors laid down by deeper rules. What you call force is merely your perception of these rules being obeyed. And obedience in physics is never loud. It is silent. You assume motion is simple. You see an object moving and think it must be pushed or pulled. You imagine a clear cause, a hand, a force, an explosion, something obvious. That's your intuition speaking. It is confident, precise, and entirely wrong. Because motion is not primary. Motion is a consequence. Motion emerges from constraints, from relationships, from geometry. The marble rolling along a surface isn't moving because someone applied a force. It moves because the shape of the surface allows it. It is the pattern of space beneath it that determines the path, not any invisible shove. Take planetary orbits. You think gravity is pulling planets around the sun. You picture a cord or an invisible string. But mathematically, The planets move the way they do because the geometry of space-time curves around mass. There is no tugging, no unseen hand. The pattern of space itself dictates what paths are allowed and which are forbidden. Orbits are not caused, they are permitted, and it is everywhere. Atoms vibrate in solids not because of relentless impacts, but because their electrons are confined to specific energy levels. A gas expands not because molecules are trying to escape, but because of statistical patterns that define possible arrangements. Motion is the echo of structure, the trace of deeper alignment. Even the photons in light follow hidden tracks. They do not drift randomly. They do not crash into everything indiscriminately. Their behavior obeys the contours of the electromagnetic field, a structure that guides them silently. You are being misled by appearances. You see movement, you see change, you see action, and you assume it is primary. You assume energy is a force because that is how your mind interprets motion, but this is wrong. Motion is the language, not the author. The geometry, the pattern of fields and spaces, is the author. Energy simply follows the rules written in that silent geometry. Think of it like water in a river. The water does not choose its path. The riverbed dictates it. Bend the riverbed slightly and the flow changes. It is the structure beneath, not the water itself, that determines motion. Replace water with particles, photons, or planets, and the analogy holds. Your intuition fails here because it mistakes movement for causation. It mistakes visibility for primacy. It mistakes energy for activity, but the universe is subtle. The patterns guiding motion are hidden. They are silent. They are everywhere. And until you acknowledge this, you will continue imagining that energy is pushing and pulling, when in reality, it is silently following the geometry it cannot break. Once you accept that, the next layer becomes unavoidable. The fields themselves, the invisible architects that impose these patterns. You believe particles are the building blocks of reality. You think energy flows from one particle to another, that interactions are collisions, and that the universe is a billiard table of moving objects. That picture is comforting. It makes sense. It satisfies the part of your mind that craves simplicity, but it is wrong. Particles are shadows of something deeper. They are excitations, temporary ripples in something that is invisible, something that exists everywhere at once. These invisible entities are fields, silent, continuous, and infinitely subtle. They are the scaffolding on which all matter, energy, and interaction ride. The electron is not a little ball with charge, it is a manifestation of the electron field. The photon is not a tiny bullet of light. It is a vibration in the electromagnetic field. The universe is threaded with these fields, layered and interacting, creating a pattern so intricate you cannot see it, and so precise it governs everything you perceive. When energy moves, it is not being carried by matter. It is being reconfigured in these fields. You cannot point to it. You cannot touch it. You cannot hear it. You can only observe the outcomes, the particle appearing, the current flowing, the light reaching your eye. Imagine plucking a guitar string. You hear a note. The string vibrates, yes, but the sound is not the string itself. It is the resonance of the air, the propagation of waves through space. Energy is similar. The apparent movement of particles is only the surface effect of invisible waves in underlying fields. Even gravity, the force you feel as weight, is not a push or a pull. According to modern physics, mass curves space, time itself. Objects move along these curves, silently following the shape of a geometry they cannot resist. No one touches them. No one shoves. They obey structure. You assume cause and effect flows through objects. In reality, cause and effect flow through fields. Fields dictate what interactions are allowed, what transitions are possible, and what motion can occur. Energy is constrained, guided, and choreographed by these silent architectures. And here is the subtle, unsettling truth. The fields do not make mistakes. They do not get tired. They do not act with intention. Yet every particle, every photon, every motion in the universe follows them exactly. Even your thoughts ride on them. Every heartbeat, every flicker of neurons, every perception obeys the patterns they impose. You are living inside a lattice you cannot see. You are surfing waves you cannot detect. Energy is not an agent in the traditional sense. It is a reflection of the pattern of the fields themselves, obeying rules you cannot perceive. This is why your intuition is failing. You think energy is a force because you see movement. You cannot see the scaffolding, so you mistake its effects for causes. But the truth is far more radical. The universe is not built from colliding objects or noisy explosions. It is built from silent, continuous fields, and energy flows only where these fields permit. Once you grasp that, you start to see why the universe prefers certain arrangements over others, why some patterns persist while others vanish, and that leads to resonance, the next layer of silent order that the universe enforces. You assume that physical outcomes are random, or at least that anything that can happen will happen. You imagine energy freely exploring possibilities, matter colliding chaotically, events unfolding without hidden preference. That assumption is comforting. It gives the illusion of freedom, of unpredictability, but it is wrong. The universe does not allow every possible arrangement. It enforces invisible rules. Some patterns are stable, some are forbidden. Some can exist only fleetingly before collapsing. This is resonance, the quiet principle that selects which arrangements survive and which vanish, without a single explosion, push, or loud declaration. Think of a wine glass vibrating at just the right frequency. Tap it gently and it hums. Strike it at a slightly different frequency and it resists, barely moving. Strike it at its natural frequency and it shatters. The energy is the same in all cases. What changes is the alignment, the resonance with the structure itself. Everything in the universe behaves this way. Electrons occupy only specific energy levels, not because some invisible hand stops them, but because the structure of their fields allows only those arrangements to persist. Molecules form only in particular configurations, not because bonds push them into place, but because the universe's silent preference for stability permits only those patterns. Even planetary systems obey resonance. Orbits are not arbitrary. Some are stable, others decay. The solar system itself is a symphony of allowed frequencies, maintained by subtle interactions you cannot see and energy you cannot hear. Resonance is not force. It is selection. It is constraint. It is silent preference. It determines the paths energy can take, the states matter can occupy, the events that can persist long enough for you to notice them. And this is profoundly unsettling. What you perceive as chaotic motion, random chance, or free choice is, in fact, the surface echo of deep, quiet order. Patterns are being enforced silently, invisibly, always. Energy does not overcome resistance, it follows resonance. Energy does not create stability, it conforms to it. Your intuition screams that the universe is a messy playground of particles, collisions, and explosions. But resonance exposes the lie. The chaos is only apparent. The true nature of reality is disciplined, selective, and almost impossibly quiet. Every structure, every motion, every interaction you witness is a note in this cosmic resonance. And if you follow the thread far enough, you see that information precedes energy, that patterns dictate motion, not the other way around. You believe energy drives the universe. You imagine it as the actor, the engine, the prime mover. Push, pull, collide, these are the verbs you expect. Cause and effect, as you perceive it, seems to flow from energy outward. That is your intuition. That is what you trust. But it is wrong. Energy does not act first. Structure acts first. Information comes before energy. The universe does not decide what to do by throwing power around. It decides by defining which arrangements are allowed and which are forbidden. Energy follows those rules. It obeys silently. It is secondary. Consider a river. You might think the water flows freely, but its path is dictated by the landscape, the information encoded in the valley, the banks, the gradient. The water moves, yes, but it cannot choose. Its apparent motion is a reflection of the pre-existing structure. Replace the river with photons, electrons, or entire galaxies, and the analogy holds. Even quantum mechanics points to this truth. Particles appear in discrete states. Transitions occur only between allowed levels. Probabilities are constrained by the structure of the wave function. Energy does not create these possibilities. It navigates them. Energy is guided by information embedded in the fields and the geometry of space itself. Think about life. Your neurons fire because they follow electrochemical gradients, yes. But those gradients exist because of a precisely arranged structure, a pattern established by evolution and physics alike. Conscious thought rides on this pre-existing architecture. Energy does not invent it. The unsettling implication is this: the universe is not a place where energy arbitrarily moves and produces effects. It is a place where patterns dictate what energy is permitted to do. Energy is a consequence, not a cause. Motion is an echo, not an origin. This reverses everything your intuition tells you. You were trained to see the universe as active, dynamic, and forceful. But in reality, it is silent, selective, and informationally constrained. Energy exists to obey patterns, not to create them. And here is the deeper discomfort. These patterns are invisible, often imperceptible. They govern everything you sense, everything you feel, everything you think, even your perception of choice. Energy is powerless without them. Without information, energy is meaningless, directionless, silent. Once you grasp that, consciousness itself cannot be seen as an accident. It becomes a rider on a carefully ordered sea of energetic possibilities, a delicate observer of silent structures that existed long before life, long before you, and likely long after. You think consciousness is an accidental byproduct of matter. You imagine it arising from neurons firing, chemicals interacting, and nothing more. You picture awareness as a consequence of energy shuffling through the brain. That is the comforting story. It makes sense. It reassures you that the familiar world is sufficient to explain itself, but it is wrong. Consciousness is not a side effect. It is a pattern, dependent phenomenon. Your awareness exists because energy flows along pre-existing, stable structures. Your thoughts do not move energy. They move within patterns already imposed by the silent order of fields. Without these structures, neurons would fire randomly, perceptions would flicker and vanish, and no coherent self could emerge. Imagine a surfer on a wave. The wave exists long before the surfer steps onto it. The surfer's skill matters, yes, but only insofar as it matches the rhythm of the wave. Step off or try to surf a choppy, random sea, and nothing happens. Your consciousness is like that surfer, riding patterns of energy that are already stable, already selected, already resonant. Even memory, which feels so intimate, is dependent on the stability of patterns in your neural networks. Every recollection is a structure being accessed and reinforced. Your mind does not impose order, it follows it. The energy of thought is secondary. The information architecture is primary. This realization is subtle and disquieting. You live under the illusion of agency because energy is moving through your brain. But the true driver is the silent order beneath, the resonance of fields that allows coherent patterns to persist. Awareness emerges where patterns permit, not where energy forces it. Your sense of identity, your perception of time, your continuity of self, all of it rides atop these invisible patterns. The universe is not merely a stage on which energy acts. It is a carefully tuned scaffold that allows consciousness to exist at all. And if consciousness is a pattern rider, then reality itself becomes less a collection of moving parts and more a web of allowed arrangements, each one delicately preselected, each one silently enforced. Energy has no choice, motion has no freedom. Even thought is constrained, flowing only along paths permitted by a quiet, invisible logic. You believed energy was the actor, consciousness the observer. Now the roles are reversed. Energy obeys. Consciousness rides. Patterns persist. Chaos as you perceive it is an illusion, and from here the final layer of realization emerges. The silent order is not just functional, it is existential. Reality itself is structured, poised, and astonishingly, beautifully coherent. You assume the universe is a chaotic expanse. You imagine randomness, collisions, and explosions shaping everything. You trust what your senses perceive: noise, change, movement, destruction. That's the comforting story. It reassures you that the universe is tangible, familiar, understandable. But it is wrong. Beneath every particle, every wave, every flicker of light, there is silent order. Not laws written on paper, not forces visibly acting, not energy in motion. A subtle, persistent architecture governs all, shaping what is allowed and what is forbidden, what persists and what vanishes. Consider a forest. Trees grow, leaves fall, rivers carve valleys. From above it seems chaotic, but step back and a hidden structure emerges. Ecosystems, nutrient cycles, symbiotic relationships. The chaos is only apparent. The patterns are real. The energy flowing through it all obeys the constraints of these patterns, silently, relentlessly. Reality itself is like that, but infinitely deeper, infinitely more precise. Fields weave a lattice. Resonance selects what survives. Patterns determine what energy may do. Motion is an echo. Consciousness is a surfer. Every observable event is a surface trace of silent, hidden orchestration. And the most unsettling truth: this order is indifferent. It does not care about your expectations, your comfort, your intuitions. It simply exists, it persists. And it is far older, far larger, and far more coherent than your perception allows. You have been taught to chase energy, to watch action, to measure force. But the true marvel is not the visible, it is the invisible. It is the architecture that energy must obey. It is the silence beneath existence, guiding, selecting, shaping every possibility without announcement, without drama, without voice. And when you glimpse this, when you accept that the universe is governed not by what pushes and pulls, but by what permits and constrains, you are left in a state that is neither fearful nor comforting, it is or at the quiet perfection that allows galaxies to spin, atoms to bind, life to emerge, consciousness to ride patterns, and the universe itself to exist as a coherent, astonishing whole. There is no actor, there is no drama, only the silent order, infinite, patient, and profound.